The hum of the airplane's engines was a soft, constant presence, the kind that usually blends into the background of a long flight. Passengers were settled in their seats, some reading, others dozing off, while the occasional cough or murmur of conversation punctuated the stillness. It was the calm before the descent, everyone lost in their own little world of comfort or tiredness. In the first-class cabin, the luxury of space and privacy seemed to soften the usual chaos of flying. Barron Trump, dressed casually in a simple yet well-fitted shirt, had settled into his spacious seat, a rare moment of peace for a young man who was usually under the glare of public eyes. His thoughts were scattered, not in any particular direction, just letting the minutes pass by. He was comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. But then, as the stewardess passed by, Barron caught sight of something that shifted the entire atmosphere in an instant. An elderly man in uniform was walking slowly down the aisle, his steps deliberate, each one carrying the weight of years that Barron could only imagine. The soldier's uniform, though faded with time, still carried the pride of a service that had long since been completed. There was something about the man's posture, worn but proud, that caught Barron's attention. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, the world around them seemed to pause. The soldier's face was gentle, yet marked with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had lived through battles, both seen and unseen. Barron, without thinking, stood up from his seat. He wasn't aware of the movement at first. It felt almost like an instinct, a reflex he couldn't control. His eyes remained fixed on the soldier, as if the world around him had disappeared, leaving just the two of them in that moment. "Sir," Barron said, his voice soft but steady, "you've earned this more than I have." He motioned toward his seat, the one he had been so comfortable in just moments before. The act was simple, yet it carried the weight of something deeper. He didn't know why he did it, but somehow in that instant, it felt like the only thing he could do. The words landed in the cabin with the quiet force of a thunderclap. The passengers, some who had been silently observing the exchange, now found themselves frozen in the moment. The unexpected gesture left them speechless. A few of them glanced around, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The air in the cabin, once thick with the hum of engines and idle chatter, became still. Barron's heart raced as he watched the soldier's eyes flicker with surprise. He wasn't expecting anything in return, yet the gesture felt so right, as if he had been waiting for the chance to do something meaningful in a world where such moments were often overlooked. The soldier, standing there for a moment, was quiet. His eyes were no longer looking down the aisle but locked onto Barron. The cabin was held in a suspended silence, everyone waiting for what would come next. Would the soldier accept? Or would the moment slip away like so many moments do? In the stillness, it felt like the world was holding its breath. The soldier stood still for a moment, his face unreadable as Barron's words settled in the air between them. There was a flicker of confusion in his eyes, quickly followed by a quiet wave of gratitude. He shifted his weight slightly, as though unsure how to respond to such an unexpected offer, to such an act of kindness that was so far removed from the world he had come to know. He looked up at Barron, a small crease between his brow. I don't understand," the soldier murmured, his voice rough but tinged with a deep humility. "Why are you doing this?" Barron could feel the weight of the soldier's words, the genuine confusion and disbelief that they carried. Here was a man who had given so much for his country, and yet he was taken aback by the simplest act of kindness, one that many others would have taken for granted. Barron stood firm, his heart in his throat as he replied, "You've served this country. This is the least I can do." The soldier blinked, his lips trembling slightly as emotion welled up behind his eyes. There was a moment of silence, where the world seemed to hold its breath again, watching as a connection was forged between two men from very different worlds. Slowly, the soldier took a step forward, his hand reaching out to gently place it on Barron's arm, a gesture of thanks, of understanding. "Thank you," the soldier whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me, for seeing the service, the sacrifice. It's been a long time since someone treated me like I mattered." Barron could feel the weight of those words, like a heavy burden the soldier had carried in silence for years. The faint lines on his face, the weariness in his eyes, they spoke of struggles that could never be fully understood unless you had lived them. Barron's chest tightened, as if the soldier's gratitude had pierced through something deep within him. "Thank you, but it's not often people like you get the recognition you deserve," the soldier continued, his voice breaking slightly. "When you've been in a uniform for so long, when you've seen the things I've seen, you don't expect much. You just keep going, keep moving forward. But every now and then, someone reminds you that you're not invisible, that your service means something." Barron nodded, a lump forming in his throat. The words the soldier spoke cut through him in ways he hadn't expected. Here was a man who had endured the sacrifices of war, who had seen the darkest parts of humanity. And yet, here he was, thanking Barron for a simple gesture that was, in Barron's mind, nothing more than what anyone should have done. But now, in the presence of the soldier's gratitude, Barron understood the depth of the moment. This wasn't just about giving up a seat. It was about recognizing a person who had been overlooked and offering something that was long overdue. As Barron tried to find the words to respond, the soldier's eyes welled up, and Barron found himself speechless, overwhelmed by the raw emotion radiating from the man before him. He didn't need to say anything. The connection had already been made, silent but profound. And the passengers around them, who had been watching in quiet awe, were beginning to feel the weight of the moment too. A soft murmur spread through the cabin as the exchange unfolded before them. A quiet sense of unity began to fill the space, as though the ripple of kindness had already begun to affect everyone on board. For Barron, the act of giving up his seat no longer felt like a simple gesture. It felt like the beginning of something much larger, something that connected them all in a way words could never fully express. The moment Barron stepped aside and motioned for the soldier to take his seat, something shifted in the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was unmistakable. The cabin, once filled with quiet hums and occasional clinks of trays, suddenly felt alive with a new energy, an energy of warmth, of connection. The soldier, still overcome with the unexpected gesture, gingerly took the seat, his back straightening as he sat down, as if to hold on to the dignity that was long overdue. The plane felt quieter now, but in that quiet, something profound was unfolding. At first, it was subtle. A few whispers from the passengers closest to Barron, unsure whether they had truly witnessed what had just happened. But soon it became clear. What had been an isolated act of kindness was beginning to ripple outward, touching more lives than just the soldiers. The effect was like a spark that had set fire to something far larger. A middle-aged woman, seated just a few rows away, looked at the soldier with softened eyes. She hadn't expected to witness such an intimate moment in the middle of a long flight. But now her heart seemed to be filled with something she hadn't realized she needed. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she reached forward, offering a bottle of water to the soldier with a smile that spoke more than words ever could. "Here," she said, her voice warm. "I hope you're comfortable." The soldier took the bottle from her, his eyes gleaming with unshed tears, nodding a silent thank you. Then, across the aisle, a young man in his 20s, his jacket still buttoned tight, leaned forward in his seat. His eyes, once distant and focused on his phone, were now filled with something else, something resembling awe. Without a word, he stood up, walked toward the flight attendant and whispered something to her. The flight attendant, who had witnessed the exchange, smiled softly and nodded. A moment later, the young man's seat in economy class was offered to the soldier. The gesture was small, yet it spoke volumes. The cabin had become a place of shared humanity, where kindness was no longer the exception. It was the rule. And just like that, the ripple began to spread. Others, watching the small moments of generosity unfold, began to reflect on their own lives, their own actions. The tension that had once hung in the air, the quiet discomfort of a long flight, melted away as small, silent gestures of goodwill were passed between passengers. A man, deep in conversation with his seatmate, paused and offered a quiet thank you to the soldier, his words hushed but sincere. A couple, holding hands, reached across the aisle, offering a piece of chocolate to the soldier, their eyes filled with gratitude for his service. Each act, no matter how small, was another piece of the puzzle of human kindness that was slowly coming together. As Barron sat back down in his original seat, he couldn't help but notice the change in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. The passengers, who had been consumed by their own world just moments ago, now shared a connection that went beyond the confines of the flight. The cabin was no longer just a space for strangers to sit side by side. It had become a sanctuary of shared compassion. There was no grand declaration, no announcement over the loudspeakers, but there was something undeniable. A quiet unity was settling over the passengers. No one spoke of it aloud, but the energy in the cabin had shifted from one of routine indifference to one of collective care. The plane was still flying through the skies, still headed toward its destination. But now, every moment felt different. The journey had taken on a deeper meaning, a journey not just of distance, but of shared human experience, of understanding, and of kindness. As the plane sailed on, passengers sat a little straighter, smiled a little brighter, and held a little more warmth in their hearts. Barron's simple act of giving up his seat had sparked something far larger than anyone could have anticipated. The power of one small gesture had made the flight a journey that none of them would ever forget. As the plane touched down and the familiar sounds of the engines quieted, the energy in the cabin had shifted. The soft murmur of conversations, the clink of seatbelts unfastening, and the shuffle of luggage were all overshadowed by something else. The story that had unfolded above the clouds was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Within moments of the plane's arrival, the first photo surfaced, captured by a passenger sitting a few rows behind Barron. The image showed the soldier seated in Barron's first-class seat, his face filled with gratitude, while Barron, standing beside him, appeared to be humbly offering his own seat. The photo, though simple, spoke volumes. It wasn't just about a seat being given up. It was about humanity, humility, and a kindness that seemed to transcend the noise of the world. Soon, the image spread like wildfire across social media, shared by passengers and viewers alike. Hashtags like kindness in the air and Barron Trump inspires began to trend as the story captured the hearts of countless people. What had started as a quiet moment on a plane was now a global conversation. The world was responding, not just to Barron's action, but to the ripple effect that it had caused. The soldier, once a stranger in uniform, became a symbol of sacrifice and service, someone who had been seen, recognized, and honored by a young man who understood the value of gratitude. He was no longer just another face in the crowd, but a man whose sacrifice was acknowledged by a simple yet powerful act of kindness. His name, too, began to spread, as people reflected on the importance of recognizing the people who served their country, often without fanfare, often without recognition. But Barron's name, too, was being associated with something new. The public persona many were familiar with had always been linked to politics, to the weight of family expectations, and to the glaring spotlight of public life. But now, for the first time, Barron's name was being shared in a completely different context. The headlines weren't about his status or wealth or name. They were about a young man who, in the middle of a crowded flight, had shown genuine humility, had given up his seat without a second thought, and had started a conversation about kindness and humanity in the most unexpected of places. As the story spread, the reactions were overwhelming. People across the world began to reflect on their own lives, asking themselves what small acts of kindness they could contribute to make the world a better place. Messages poured in from all corners of the globe, with people expressing gratitude not just for Barron's gesture, but for the reminder it gave them that even the smallest of actions can have a profound impact. A grandmother wrote about how her grandchildren had asked her to tell them stories about the young man who gave up his seat for a soldier, and how it had inspired them to be more thoughtful in their own daily lives. A teacher shared how her students had begun doing little acts of kindness in class, from helping each other with homework to offering compliments. It was clear that Barron's simple act had touched something deep in the hearts of many. Meanwhile, Barron sat quietly at home, humbled by the response. He hadn't anticipated the global impact of his gesture. He had simply acted on instinct, seeing the soldier's tired eyes, sensing the weight of his service, and responding in the most human way possible. Now, as he read the posts, the comments, and the messages, he was overwhelmed by the realization that what had started as a small personal decision had become something far bigger than he ever expected. The soldier, too, reflected on the events that had unfolded after the flight. He felt deeply moved by how one moment of kindness had grown, touched by the countless messages of gratitude he received from strangers who, though they had never met him, recognized the value of his service. He hadn't expected this attention, had never imagined that his quiet act of sacrifice would be shared with the world. But in the end, he knew that Barron's generosity had given him something far more valuable than just a seat. It had given him a voice, a platform to remind the world that those who serve deserve to be seen, to be appreciated, to be acknowledged. The simple truth was clear. Kindness, no matter how small, had the power to spark change, to inspire, and to make the world feel just a little bit more connected. And Barron, in that quiet moment on the plane, had made the world feel a little more human. As the story of Barron Trump's simple act of kindness spread across the world, something unexpected began to unfold. What had been a quiet exchange between a young man and a soldier on a plane had sparked a wave of goodwill that rippled far beyond the confines of that airplane cabin. The world, it seemed, was starved for reminders of the good that still existed in humanity, and Barron's gesture had given people exactly what they needed. Proof that kindness wasn't just possible, it was still alive. Across social media, the story continued to unfold. People from every corner of the globe shared their thoughts, their experiences, and their own acts of kindness that had been inspired by Barron's moment. For the first time in a long time, people felt a renewed sense of connection, a shared belief that, no matter where they were from or who they were, kindness was a language everyone could understand. A woman from California shared how she had been in the grocery store, waiting in line, when she noticed an elderly man struggling to carry his bags. Inspired by Barron's gesture, she stepped forward without hesitation, offering to help him to his car. The elderly man, surprised but grateful, accepted. As they walked, they struck up a conversation about kindness and the simple joy of human connection. "It only takes a second," she wrote, "and yet it can change someone's entire day." Her post was shared hundreds of times, each person moved by the simplicity and beauty of the act. A teacher from Ohio shared how her students, after reading the story, had taken it upon themselves to start a kindness campaign in their school. Each day they performed small acts of goodwill, holding the door for one another, helping with assignments, writing anonymous notes of encouragement. It wasn't just about being nice. It was about changing the atmosphere, about making the world a more welcoming place for everyone. The teacher's post was accompanied by a photo of her students, their faces full of hope and excitement, as they handed out small handmade cards to teachers and fellow students that read, "Thank you for being you." Meanwhile, across the world in a small village in Italy, a group of young adults started an initiative to help veterans in their community. Inspired by the soldier's story, they organized events to raise awareness for the needs of those who had served, providing meals and offering companionship to those who often found themselves forgotten. It was a simple act of kindness, just like Barron's. But the ripple effect was undeniable. The small village, once isolated and quiet, had now become a hub of kindness, all sparked by a single moment on a plane. As these stories spread, Barron remained in the background, not seeking any recognition but quietly aware of the power his actions had ignited. The media attention, though overwhelming, did not change him. If anything, it solidified his belief in the importance of humility and genuine kindness. What had begun as an instinctive decision to offer his seat to the soldier had become a global movement, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions have the largest impact. Barron's family, too, watched the story unfold. His parents, who had been a part of the public eye for much of their lives, felt a deep sense of pride in the way Barron had handled the situation. It was not just the act itself that moved them. It was the quiet dignity with which he had done it. In a world so often dominated by headlines and opinions, Barron had found a way to be part of something that transcended all of that. His act of kindness had reminded the world of something simple but essential, that the most powerful moments often come not from grand gestures or speeches, but from the quiet, genuine actions of one person helping another. The soldier, too, found himself overwhelmed by the response. He had never expected such attention, had never thought that his own sacrifices would be acknowledged in this way. But now, as he watched the stories unfold on social media, he realized something profound. It wasn't just Barron's act of kindness that had made an impact. It was the recognition of service, of sacrifice, and of the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. Barron's gesture had given the soldier more than just a seat. It had given him a sense of belonging, a reminder that his service had not been in vain. The wider impact of this one moment was undeniable. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about people remembering that their actions mattered, that kindness mattered, and that, in a world that often felt fractured, these moments of connection were the threads that could weave it all back together. Barron, the soldier, the passengers, they had all played a part in something larger than themselves. They had reminded the world that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change lives, one person at a time. And for that, the world was forever grateful. As the dust settled and the world continued to reflect on the kindness Barron had shown, something quietly transformative was happening. The ripples of his gesture hadn't stopped. They were still spreading, quietly yet powerfully. Barron sat back, in a quiet moment of reflection, as he watched the world react to something that, at its core, had been simple: giving up a seat. But in the process, he had unknowingly sparked something much larger than any of them could have anticipated. In the weeks following the flight, Barron received countless messages, some from strangers, some from those who had seen his act and felt moved to share their own stories of kindness. Some messages were long, filled with personal stories of gratitude and transformation. Others were short but carried weight. "You made me believe again. Because of you, I helped an elderly neighbor today." He could not have anticipated this wave of change. The initial act, so spontaneous, had set off a chain reaction. It wasn't about him, though. It was about what his actions had inspired in others. The soldier's story had become a symbol of sacrifice and service that was often overlooked, and Barron's simple offer of a seat had transformed it into a moment of connection for people all over the world. Barron had unknowingly reminded people that it didn't take grand gestures to make a difference. It took the courage to act with kindness, to put someone else's needs before your own, no matter how small. The world had witnessed that, and it had woken up to the power of compassion. Call to action. So what can we do? How can we be part of this movement of kindness? It starts with small moments, the choice to help someone, to listen, to give when others expect nothing in return. Take a moment today to pay it forward and share your story. Let's continue to build a world where kindness is the rule, not the exception.